I sort of joke when people ask me, what's the cause of bad salesmanship? And I say bad parenting. If you're asked the buyers, I think a lot of that's overstated. So, yeah, there's research that came out in the midst of the pandemic saying, buyers, even less so than before, don't want to talk to salespeople. They don't want to talk to salespeople that can't help them. That was the thing. I mean, if you can't help them, then sure, they'll find a way to do it without you. There's this fiction that you hear more and more is that, and it's not that automation, everybody's availing themselves of automation, and there's a great place for it. And certainly some of the automation is great for some of the repetitive tasks that sellers do that they don't need to do personally. But machines don't have empathy. They don't have creativity. They don't have curiosity. Things that really help the buyer get a better understanding of their problem and what they can do to achieve their most important thing, their desired outcomes. It's going to come from a human.
Today on the season 2 finale of Sales Intersection, we have the legendary Andy. If you don't have your sales expertise ID on you, you ain't getting through. Bouncer Paul. Andy hosts the best conversations in sales on his 900 plus episode podcast. He has written 2 award-winning sales books, Zero Time Selling and Amp Up Your Sales. He's ranked number 8 on LinkedIn's list of top 50 global sales experts. He has consulted with some of the biggest businesses in the world, including Square, Philips, Grubhub, and more, making him one of the leading voices in the sales industry today. So, Andy, of course, I want to start with a question.
Sure.
Other than being invited to be on my podcast, what else would you add to the accolades most dear to your heart? The about Andy Paul we don't see on any social media channel or podcast interview?
Well, married to the love of my life, 2 great kids, one of whom is, well, actually, they're both working in the business now. One of whom is my business partner, my son. So, father, husband, those work.
That's fantastic. Biggest job that you could probably do in this world. Right?
Yeah, and it's like I said, unexpected pleasure to have my son be with me. We started the podcast together, and the podcast was acquired a couple of years ago, and so we've been on this adventure together, and it's been a lot of fun.
That's great. In the 500s, this must just be. It's like flossing your teeth.
After 959 episodes,
900.
It's been so much fun because I've learned so much, and I tell people that want to think about starting a podcast. I said, well, think about what you want to learn, and use the podcast as a tool to go learn that. And so I've been fortunate to speak with. Well, we've recorded close to 1,000 interviews with some of the smartest people around and some more interesting people around, and every time I speak with someone, even like today, it's a learning experience. So it's a great, and for us, it's been great in terms of our business, in terms of just building our platform and getting the word out about what we believe in and what we think is important.
Sure. Selfishly, I gotta say. I'm pleasantly surprised that at my first cold outreach, I got a response and a yes from number 8 expert globally. And 2, I got to ask, why did you take this podcast?
Well, I think it's your middle name more than anything. Break Bill. No, I looked at what you were doing, and so one of my passions at this point in my career, because I'm much closer to the end of it than the beginning, is to try to support new voices in sales. And so I look what people are doing. I run a mastermind group for aspiring sales authors. We're actually the second cohort is in the midst of it right now. I go on a lot of podcasts because I want to help people find their voice and contribute to the conversation. So, it's part of just trying to, as I said, build the conversation, bring more voices, new voices into sales.
And I saw on your site there's a component of purpose and selling, purpose and business. Is that, based on your cursory research of my podcast, any overlap there, or is it way off, or what? Can you get into that at all?
No, I didn't delve into that a lot, but I think having a purpose is important. It's for me at this point in this adventure I've sort of been on this chapter of my career, the last 11, 12 years at this point is giving back as much as possible. And sort of got into sales by accident, but it became a calling, really. And it's afforded me incredible opportunities in my life to meet tons of interesting people, travel the world, have adventures I wouldn't have thought of, as part of the job. And then, some financial rewards that go along with that from working hard. And so I just, want other people to have some of the same things that I had.
Now, number 8 in the world, and I know you're being humble about it. That was 1 year. Maybe you deserve to be number 8, or maybe deep down you deserve to be number 1. But part of the intersection of sales, the sales intersection is the intersection of money and meaning. But part of that is the how my guests derive meaning, fulfillment, how they, the impact that they get out of sales.
Sure.
The unique value proposition they bring to sales to make it more meaningful, and to to be on the front lines of the ever evolving state of sales, and to evolve it hopefully in a positive way. To have the accolades you have and to be ranked number 8, what is it you think that you bring that is unique, that maybe even controversial, that may stick out from the rest of the 20 or 100? That you feel is that is respected, let's say, by the top 20, that is different?
Sure. Well, it's for me. I've spent my entire career, and really even up until I started my own company 20 years ago, but actually even since then, because most of my clients have been in tech, is working in complex technical fields. I was certainly not trained in engineering or any technical disciplines as a history major coming out of college. And what I found is I analyzed how I was able to achieve some level of success in my own career working in these, selling complex communication systems, satellite communication systems to large enterprises around the world, is it started with me. And it was about me, and not from a, hey, I'm so great type standpoint, but it was the connection I made with people, the credibility I built, the trust I built. They may be buying something worth tens of millions of dollars from me and the company I worked for, but I knew that the fundamental bond was with me personally, and that I was the differentiator more so than anything else in the mind of the customer. And so I was analyzing why was that the case, and what was I doing? And it wasn't like I was the only person in the world doing it, obviously, but for me, it's because I didn't have those technical skills. I had to be more transparent, be willing to, as I said, connect with people, be a little more vulnerable, to build the credibility, to build the trust with the people I was selling to. As I said, I'd graduate from college with no discernible job skills, so I went into sales. But what I had is I'm an extremely curious individual. It's why I've done this podcast for so long. I read widely. So I was just curious about the people I was meeting and what they were doing, and that it helped me when I was talking to customers, is because I wanted to really understand. And that's just, again, part of my nature. If I'm talking to someone, I really want to understand about them and what they're doing, what's important to them. And so it's just sort of these basics that sort of came out as it wasn't about my product expertise, though I'm a reasonably smart person. I learned the product. I knew how the customers are using it. But I really focused on how do I connect with the other person? How do I find out what's most important to them? And how do I help them get that? And it was that sort of more human-driven sales that I think set me apart. And it's what I still primarily talk about. And I think you need to have a certain level of process, but I think that too often we default these days to technology, we default to rigid, compliance-oriented sales processes, and I believe that the more agency you give to the individuals to develop their own way of selling that enables them to become the best version of themselves, the more success they're going to have, the more success the organization will have.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I ask in more or less the same fashion the question I just asked you, and a lot of times people will respond with something that is nature-oriented. You're mentioning things like curiosity, transparency, building trust, and I'm sure that's not something that you picked up in a book, right?
People do talk about it. People do talk about it, but it's. I sort of joke when people ask me, what's the cause of bad salesmanship? And I say bad parenting. And I only say it somewhat facetiously, but it's at the end of the day, it's about who we are as people, right? It's our integrity, it's our values, it's our character. Sure, there are instances. I wrote a blog post once not that long ago where some people sort of went up in arms because I thought I was being naive. I said, but in general, right, as people don't do business with people they don't like, they find objectionable, they think are asses. I mean, it's just, sure, it happens. There are exceptions. We all know bad people that have succeeded at business, but that's not the general case. And it costs you nothing to be likable. It costs you nothing to be interested in someone else. It costs you nothing to have some empathy for someone else, another human being. It costs you nothing. Yeah. So why wouldn't you do that? And so for me, it's worked.
And I'm one that thinks, 20 years ago, if you lined up 10 random people and you asked them, what's your association with salesmen, 9 out of 10 probably would have a negative association. And today, maybe something similar.
11 out of 10 probably, yeah.
11 out of 10, right? Part of that, I think, is that only 4% of universities offer a sales-oriented curriculum or sales classes dealing with sales, and 56 or 7% of people that graduate college end up in a sales job or enter the sales world. Mm-hmm. So there's not a lot of chances to glorify sales, to really teach the etiquette, to make sure that those first experiences with the SDR, BDR, or what have you, a startup enterprise salesman, are very pleasant. But do you agree that sales is moving in a positive direction in regards to it's progressively more important that you are a good person, that's a requirement?
Sadly, no. And I think we have the opportunity to. I mean, it's never too late, but it's certainly something I care deeply about. Actually, I've got a new book coming out in February, which is almost precisely about that point. No, because the technology sort of that has come into sales is the way it's used. It's used in a lazy fashion, by and large, by most companies. It's used as instruments of command and control and compliance, rather than how do we help these people become better. And we have this acknowledged, and people talk about it all the time. There's been research reports about it, that there's this vast disparity in the amount of coaching that sellers feel they need versus what they're getting, partially because we don't enable sales managers to know how to do it. We don't invest in sales managers enough. And so they resort to managing the way that they have, with the tools they have at hand, which is, what are your activity metrics, right? And as opposed to, let's really sit down. Let me as a manager really find out what's most important to you and how can I help you achieve that. And so, I don't know if we're any worse off than we were, 10, 15 years ago, but it hasn't improved any. And I would make the case that perhaps it's gotten a little bit worse, where we're defaulting more towards sales behaviors that buyers are less comfortable with, or not comfortable with, and then also that sales behaviors that sellers aren't comfortable with. I mean, if there was a study that came out from uncrushed.org that talks about mental health issues in sales, and a study they did early this year So it's still in the pandemic, but I don't think the results were purely attributable to the pandemic. And it was saying that 75% of sellers report being stressed or extremely stressed. I don't think that's all about meeting their numbers. I mean, certainly there's some of that, but I think it's just part of the job and the way they're being asked to do the job. And so we have to, I think one of the changes we can make is to change that perspective, that perception about what sales is, and get away from this idea that it's just, the stereotypical behaviors that you talked about, sort of the pushy, persuasive, overbearing, pitch first, ask questions later type salesperson, into something that's much more buyer focused or buyer aligned, let's say, that says, really our ability to sell something to another human being is first and foremost based on our ability to form some level of connection with them. That opens the door to us building credibility and trust. That opens the door to us asking the types of questions we need to ask to truly understand what is most important to them in terms of the problems they're trying to solve and the outcomes they're trying to achieve, which then opens the door to us giving them something of value that helps them make a decision. But if we don't do that first thing first, which is just essentially and only a human skill, making that connection, then our ability to do the rest is really hampered.
Yeah, I mean, how often do you hear in an interview process any questions about how good of a person you are or how much integrity you have?
Well, there are questions you can ask. If you took the time, there are questions you can ask to sort of get a sense of people's character.
Asked,
They're not at all. And I'm interested in what book of business you had before and what sort of quota did you carry? And it's like, really? There's better questions to ask than that. And
I think, and this may just be my opinion, but to compensate for that lack of experience that is missing in the high school or college years, we have automation, right? We have automation out the wazoo with account-based marketing, with sales enablement, there's about 100 different terms for in my eyes, basically kind of the same solution. Basically a way to automate the buyer's journey up until about the 60 or 70% mark, or a way to automate which collateral, what to say, when to say it, who to say it to. And basically the buyer is used to automation up until the point they're done with a real person. And there's a oftentimes there's a disconnect. I was kind of dealing with something robotic, and then now all of a sudden I'm dealing with a real person. What do you feel is, what do you feel, and we're talking SDR, junior AE to enterprise sales leader up. What is the skill that they should be focusing on, given all this automation, given that you can just sit in your seat and ramp up in a matter of days, given, sales enablement tools, given that there's tools to show you, what to use, given to show you where the buyer is.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's, if you're asked the buyers, I think a lot of that's overstated. So, there's research that came out in the midst of the pandemic saying, buyers, even less so than before, don't want to talk to salespeople. They don't want to talk to salespeople that can't help them. That was the thing. I mean, if you can't help them, then sure, they'll find a way to do it without you. And that's what accounts for some of the self-education that buyers go through these days, because there's a certain level they can do. They don't need a salesperson. But buyers also know that with the assistance of the right salesperson, they can gain a better understanding of what their problems are and what the opportunities are that they have to solve them. And that's the role of a seller, is, if you're not any more valuable, if you can't add any more value than what the customer can find on your website or on a piece of content that you can send to them or they can download, then there's no role for you. So, but that doesn't mean customers don't want to talk to sellers. I think people need to sort of dismiss that. They want to talk to sellers that can help them, that can add value. And so it doesn't mean that you have to become a product expert necessarily. You want to know as much as you can. If you can be a product expert, great. But your ability to persist in asking the right types of questions to surface what the buyer's concerns are. As I like to say, is you can boil selling down to very simply is, your job as a seller is to listen to understand what's the most important thing to a buyer and then help them get that. That's your job, right? And so your discovery process is really geared towards, hey, what is this most important thing? And who's it most important to? And what can I do to help them get that? And if the buyer feels that you're doing that, then yeah, they're going to talk to you. If you're helping them make progress in their buying journey, they'll still give you time. If you're not helping them, if you're just consuming their time without adding anything of value that helps them make progress toward their goal, you're not going to get any more time. So it's there's this fiction that you hear more and more is that, and it's not that automation, everybody's availing themselves of automation, and there's a great place for it. And certainly some of the automation is great for some of the repetitive tasks that sellers do that they don't need to do personally. But machines don't have empathy. They don't have creativity. They don't have curiosity. Things that really help the buyer get a better understanding of their problem and what they can do to achieve their most important thing, their desired outcomes. It's going to come from a human.
So, relevant to your answer there, let's contextualize my follow-up question and make it that you're the buyer here buying this podcast being a winner, and me trying to figure out what's important to you. What is a win for you today, walking away thinking this was not a waste of your time? Coming in, what would just be absolutely fascinating to talk about that you would love to spend more time on versus what Eric Jones thought might be fascinating to talk about with Andy Paul and the questions I'm coming up with? What is top of mind and that you wouldn't mind spending the next 15 minutes talking about?
Well, I'm open to talk about anything. I'm open. I think that this is a great topic, though, because I think that here's, I think, what keeps people from succeeding at the level that they aspire to. There's fundamentally wrong idea about what their job is. If you ask most sellers what their job is, they'll tell you, well, it's to persuade somebody to buy my product. And I believe that if that's sort of the animating purpose in your mind as you come to work every day, then that's a losing proposition for you. If you picture your job as my job is to, as I said before, is to understand what's the most important thing to a buyer and help them get that. Yeah, I think that's a purpose that a lot of people would love to have. It makes your job very fulfilling to help people achieve these things. And that's just one of sort of several mindsets that I think we need to reset for sellers so that they think more about, it's not about what they know in aggregate. It's about what they can help the customer understand and what they themselves can understand and how they can help the buyer make progress in their buying journey. And, there's lots of sources of value. Everybody talks about delivering value, and they always think it's a piece of content or it's some pithy insight that we can give the buyer. And it's not always that. I found that sometimes the most valuable thing I can provide to a buyer is a question. So, we have to, you talk about education, sort of problem is that we don't have enough sales education in the secondary schools, in college and so on. And that's true. More is coming online. But I think I've guest lectured and watched lectures at some universities. I don't know it's necessarily the answer unless there's someone fairly enlightened and progressive that's leading the program. Like Howard Dover at University of Texas Arlington, I think University of Texas Arlington or University of Dallas. I forget which campus he's on. But Howard Dover, has got this great program he's running on there that is really making kids ready for employment and giving them a realistic sense of what it's like to be in sales. And that's to make better choices.
It's unfortunate for the buyer that they have so many negative experiences, right? And it's unfortunate that probably 0% of the 10-year-olds you ask what they want to be when they grow up, the answer is sales, right?
Oh, yeah. I up until the day I was hired, I wouldn't have, for my first sales job, I wouldn't have thought I was going into sales.
And I can swear to God, someone's going to take this idea and make it their own podcast, and I'm going to try to incorporate it into my own podcast. But one thing I want to do is I want to incorporate people like you that have been keynote speakers that are named on the top 10 list of God knows what, that have over 900 podcasts, and also bring in people that are in the front lines, trenches, day-to-day, SDR, BDR, selling, AEs. Because I've been in companies where I've been asked in my ramp time to meet with 30 different people from BDRs, SDRs to the C levels, and I deliberately ask the same questions, and I get completely different answers. And one of the reasons why I want to implement that into my podcast is, do you think there is a detachment from these people that have a platform online that are schooling these newbies about how to sell, and then what's actually realistic and what they're going through on a day-to-day level? Is there a detachment, or should they be following your advice word for word?
Well, I think what people have to do is make a choice, right? I mean, what I write about, stuff that's worked for me, I've seen it work for lots of people, but it's not universal. And, if there are 5 million salespeople in the United States, there are 5 million sales methods in the United States. And that's the way it should be, quite frankly. And so as an individual seller, regardless of what level you're at, your job, your responsibility is to find those things and those ways and those methods and those techniques that work for you, that you can build into your own unique selling process. Because that's truly what happens anyway. But the difference is, are you just doing it robotically, or are you actually being intentional about it? Are you actually paying attention to what works for you and what doesn't? And I like to advocate that people keep a journal, what I call, their personal sales book. Write your own sales book. What works for you and why does it work? Why do you think it works? Understand the justification for that. And then, there's more than ever, to your point, there's lots of information out there about sales, online, LinkedIn, all sorts of places. I don't think it's all good myself. I wouldn't expect, people will respond to my comments. They don't all universally agree with me. That's fine. The point is, there's not one size fits all. But you have to be intentional about finding the things and trying and experimenting the things that work for you. And that's it. Become this best version of yourself. If you can do that, even if you're not the top performer on your team, big deal. If you feel like you're fulfilled because you're doing as well as you can do and you're still learning and improving, life sounds good. Yeah. So there's lots of people want to put like rating systems on online advice and so on. So sure, whatever. But I think it's the fact that there's this marketplace of ideas out there that's never existed before that gives sellers an opportunity to see and read things that perhaps resonate with them in a way that others don't. You get the chance to pick and choose. That's why I'm not a huge fan of companies. We're going to implement this sales methodology across our entire team. That's fine. I mean, they'll learn something from it. That's great. But at the end of the day, if you take your top 10% sellers, top 20% sellers, they all sell uniquely. They all sell their own way. And they may use part of that training, they may not. And so your job as a manager, I believe, is to help everybody be like, make the choices that those top people made to find the things that work best for them and give them the sense of agency to put them into play.
So I want to take Andy Paul as a 22-year-old coming out of college and looking for a job.
Yes.
And let's just start with that process. How would you recommend going about that process? Identifying, in the prospecting lists, what would you use? What tools would you use, or sage advice that you have to identifying what are the right companies I should be going for, and then going about breaking through the noise and contacting them?
Yeah, I think that choice of company, that's an interesting question. I don't think you can make that decision as a 22-year-old. What's the right company?
You got to keep the lights on at that point, right?
Yeah, you don't know, right? I was fortunate in my first job working for a company called Burroughs. At that time, they're the second largest computer company in the world. They had fantastic training programs. So, fantastic. They offered solid training programs, and that was perfect for me. It's just what I needed. I couldn't have known that during the interview process. Yeah, I knew big companies were more likely to train you. That was about the depth of my knowledge about the corporate world at that point. But that's one thing I would ask if I were a newbie looking for work is, how do you train people? And if it's, we throw in our 90-day onboarding program, I'd be a little skeptical, because it's like, okay, what do you do beyond that, right? How are you going to help me achieve the goals that I want to achieve? And a lot of companies don't have an answer for that. They don't have a career path for SDRs, BDRs, entry-level salespeople. So it's going to be a little bit of a crapshoot.
Yeah.
So what I don't think I was smart enough to do this on my first job, but I'll give the advice, is soon after my first job, is I shopped for bosses. I wanted to work for people that I thought were going to add a lot to me, that were going to teach me. As like I say, people that sort of scared me, that were smart. I wanted to work for really smart people that I thought had a lot to teach and convey to me. And in an environment where I thought I was going to do something interesting that I would also learn a ton just from doing. So, and I always was pretty confident that if I did that, then the financial rewards would follow. So for me, that was third on the list. Oftentimes, money was third on the list. I wanted to learn. I wanted to get better. And maybe I was naive, thinking that if I did so, I would be able to make a living doing it. But it worked out. I think those are the right motivations. Put yourself in a position where you're doing interesting stuff. And I ended up just by accident, getting into international sales. Spent 15 years traveling the world, sold on every continent but Antarctica. It's a ton of fun. Look for challenges. Don't look for challenging bosses. Don't do it based purely on the money, because I've seen several examples just in the last year. One company I know where AEs, I'm willing to bet, they jumped too soon. They were too young into the job. They got an offer for substantially more money, and I'm willing to bet that they're running into trouble.
Okay, so I want to be sensitive to time here. Quick draw McGraw, Doc Holliday questions that shouldn't take too long to answer. I'm a big fan of books on psychology of sales, not the how to win in a post-COVID environment, those kind of things. Top 3 sales books that come to mind for you.
I'm laughing. That's a hard question because I read so many, because the authors come on the show. Well, top 3. I don't know if I have a top 3. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Let me look at my list. There's one book I was read by a guy named last year, John Reed, from Models to Mindsets. Was a great book, very under-recognized book about sales. I would go with that one. Another one I read recently that I really liked was The Weekly Coaching Conversation by Brian Sousa. Trying to think what else I read recently. Oh gosh, it's hard. I hate to stumble, and it's a hard question, but I literally read dozens of sales books every year for guests on my show, and they all start running together. Okay. But oftentimes it's the non-sales books that I find they're most interesting, that have lessons for sales. I just read a book called A Minute to Think by Juliet Funt, about how do we build time into our day to just think, right? What she calls build white space into the day. That was an excellent book that I'd recommend.
Do you meditate, by the way?
Yeah, off and on, but every day I do breathing exercises. So I'm pretty disciplined about that. So I'll do 5-10 minutes of breathing exercises in the morning and night.
Got it.
And so it's sort of my meditation.
Mentors that come to mind in your life?
Well, the mentor that was sort of most impactful for me was a boss I had 35 years ago. He was so smart. A guy, John, so smart, and challenged me in a way I'd never been challenged before. He was so on top of things, and he taught me so much about selling to big accounts. I'd never sold to major accounts before that, and I just remember one day I get a call on a Sunday afternoon from John, and out of the blue, He wants to do a pipeline review. And
love those.
And I said, okay. And we start going through the accounts. And it dawns on me after about 10, 15 minutes that John knows more about my accounts than I do. And he hadn't even been talking to him. I was just part of his experience. He knew what should be going on. But I wasn't asking the questions that should be asked. And I wasn't getting to the level of detail I needed to get. And I wasn't applying enough intellectual rigor to the whole process. And it was just this, it was just sort of this epiphany. I was like, holy shit, my boss is running faster than I am. And so from that point forward in my life and career, it's like, yeah, that's never going to happen again. And so it's just a lesson about preparation, but about detail, about curiosity, about understanding, and not being satisfied with superficial responses to questions, and really knowing that I've never forgotten.
Great. That's fascinating. Last question.
Sure.
If you, looking back, maybe what you would have answered at 10 years old, or forget about that, thinking back, what you might do differently. If you weren't in sales, if you weren't the celebrity you are in sales as an expert, what would you be doing? Would you be a fireman or something a lot different? Or
Well, I was having this conversation actually with somebody on my interview I was doing for my show earlier this week. Is for a moment when I was getting ready to graduate college, I serious thought about becoming a professional swim coach.
Wow.
So it's not like I was a world-beating swimmer. I swum competitively in high school, but I'd coached swimming, age group swimming, during summers in college, and had some success, and there was an opportunity to pursue it, and I gave it some consideration because I love coaching. And even today, I still do a lot of master swimming, and I love it when the coaches can't make it to practice because they asked me to fill in, and I love that still.
That's great. Well, Andy, this has been a very valuable use of my time. I hope you're going to walk away thinking that this was a valuable use of yours, and I asked some questions, hopefully that were stimulating.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to point my listeners to? Website, otherwise?
Well, at this point, I would listen to a podcast, a Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, and I think this week was 959. We're going to hit 1,000 by the end of the year, and maybe you'll have me back next year. I have a new book coming out in February that we're excited about, and we'll be sort of making the tour to help people learn about that.
I'll wait till after you hit 1,000.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, great. Well, hey, honor to have you on my show, Andy. I follow all your posts. It's hard to keep up because you put out so much content. I don't know how you find the time, but in terms of the sales acumen that I glean from these posts, it's up there with some of the top sales mentors I've encountered in my career. So thank you for that.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Okay. Well, have a great day and a great life splitting your time between San Diego and New York.
All right. Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.